I never thought much about working late at McDonald's. It was a usual part of the grind. The place was quiet at night, just the low hum of the fryer and the clatter of trays as I cleaned the counters. It was a slow Tuesday with only a few late-night customers filtering through the drive-thru. I wiped down the grill, thinking about how close I was to the end of my shift. All I wanted was to get home and crawl into bed. Then he came in. It was a little after 2 a.m. when I first saw him. I didn't even hear the door chime as he entered, and at first I thought he was just another late-night regular. He wasn't tall, but something about his presence was off. His eyes were too intense, his movements too stiff, like he was forcing himself to act normal. I offered him a smile, asking if he wanted anything. He didn't answer right away. He just stared at the menu, as if it was hard for him to decide. He finally looked up, his eyes locked onto mine, and that's when I felt it. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just his silence, it was the way he was standing, the way his fingers twitched by his side, as if he was ready to do something, but didn't know what. "I'll take a Big Mac," he muttered, his voice low and raspy, "and a milkshake, make it quick." I nodded, and as I turned to the fryer, I could feel his gaze on me. It was like he was studying me, like he knew something about me that I didn't even know myself. My skin crawled, but I pushed the feeling down, telling myself to focus on the job. I could hear him pacing behind me, just the sound of his footsteps, slow and deliberate. I turned around, trying to keep it casual, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "You work here alone?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence. "Yeah," I answered quickly, trying to sound confident. "It's just me tonight." That's when I saw the knife. He had it in his hand, just barely out of view behind the counter. The gleam of the blade caught the light for a split second, and my stomach dropped. My heart began to race. This wasn't some random late-night customer. This was something far worse. The knife glinted under the overhead lights, the cold steel reflecting the fluorescent buzz above. My mind went blank for a second, but instinct kicked in. I backed away slowly, trying to act calm. "Is everything all right?" I asked, my voice a little shaky despite myself. I needed to keep him talking, keep him distracted. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step closer, his movements unnervingly slow. I couldn't take my eyes off the knife. Every step he took brought it closer, and with it, the terrible realization that this wasn't a robbery. It felt worse, like he wasn't after my money or the food. He was after me. "You know," he said after what felt like an eternity, "I've been watching you. You're different from the others. I've seen you before, late at night. You never notice me, but I notice you." My breath caught in my throat. I could feel the blood drain from my face. My mind raced, trying to remember if I had ever seen him, but nothing came to mind. I worked the night shift regularly, but I had never seen this man before. I don't know what you mean," I stammered, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've never seen you before." The man smiled, a twisted, unsettling grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You'd be surprised how much you miss when you're too busy with your own little world." His words were starting to make sense in a way that terrified me. This wasn't some random guy off the street. This was someone who had been watching me, learning my routine. And that was just the beginning. The sound of the milkshake machine whirring in the background felt like it was echoing through the entire restaurant. My hands shook as I grabbed the cup, trying to act like everything was normal, but my mind was racing. Should I run? Should I try to fight him off? The knife was so close now, and I knew one wrong move could be my last. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, the words escaping before I could stop them. I needed answers, some reason that made sense of this nightmare. "I don't need a reason," he said, his voice turning cold. "I just need you to understand that you can't hide from the things you've ignored." His grip tightened around the knife, and I knew I had no more time to waste. I needed to act now before it was too late. But the thought of running was paralyzing. What if I ran and he chased me down? What if this was just the beginning of something far worse? Before I could decide, the man took a step forward. The knife was aimed directly at me now, and I could hear his breathing grow heavier. I backed into the kitchen, my heart hammering in my chest, but the door was locked from the inside. There was nowhere to go. I was trapped. The kitchen door was locked, the only exit blocked by the man with the knife. My thoughts raced as I frantically scanned the room for anything that could help me. The fryer was right there, but I knew I couldn't grab it fast enough to stop him. The knives on the wall, useless against the one he was holding. He took another slow step forward, his eyes fixed on me like a predator about to pounce. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back, the coldness of the metal floor beneath my feet. My pulse thundered in my ears. There was no way out. "You're not getting away," he said, his voice calm, almost soothing. "I told you, you can't hide from me." I swallowed hard, trying to keep the panic from taking over. I needed to do something, anything. I wasn't going to let him end me like this. Not here. Not like some random late-night shift worker. "Why?" I asked again, my voice shaking, but louder now. "Why me? What did I ever do to you?" His expression softened for just a second. It almost looked like pity, or maybe it was amusement. "You've done nothing," he replied. "That's the beauty of it. I could have chosen anyone, but you're the one I've been watching. You're the one who never saw me." I didn't understand what he meant by that, but I didn't have the luxury of thinking about it anymore. I lunged toward the fryer, grabbing the nearest pan with hot oil. It was a desperate move, but I had to try something. The man lunged at me, but in that split second I swung the pan in his direction. The hot oil splashed across his arm and he screamed, the knife flying from his hand as he stumbled back. I didn't wait for him to recover. I bolted for the back door, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would explode in my chest. I heard him shouting behind me, his voice distorted by pain and rage, but I didn't stop. I ran and I didn't look back. I made it to the parking lot, gasping for breath, my legs weak beneath me. The police arrived not long after, but by the time they got there, he was gone. They found the knife, the blood, but no trace of the man. He had disappeared into the night like a ghost. They never caught him. I don't work at McDonald's anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching me, waiting. Sometimes, when I'm alone, I'll hear footsteps behind me, or feel eyes on my back, and every time I think of him, the man with the knife, the man who knew me better than I knew myself. I'll never know why he picked me, but I'm sure of one thing. He's still out there, and he's still watching. I'd been working at McDonald's for about 6 months when things started getting weird. At first, it was just like any other fast food job. Long hours, a lot of customers, and the usual behind-the-counter chaos. The pay was decent, and I had a pretty good crew working with me, but there was always something off about the late-night shifts. You could feel it as soon as the clock struck midnight. The energy in the restaurant shifted. It became quieter, like something was waiting to happen. I usually worked the night shift, and we had regulars who'd come in late for their Big Macs and fries, but they didn't really bother me. The ones who freaked me out were the new faces. The ones who slipped in just as the sun set, but you couldn't remember ever seeing them before. They'd sit in the corners in the dimmest light, always staring at the employee, never eating much, never saying much. One night, it was just me and Sandy on the register. It was quiet, way quieter than usual for a Friday night. The manager had already gone home, and the rest of the crew was cleaning up in the back. I didn't even notice him at first. He was sitting in the farthest booth right by the window. The lighting made his face hard to read, but I could feel him watching me. There was something about the way he was sitting, like he was waiting for something. I tried not to look at him, but it was impossible. His eyes never left me. "Can I help you?" I asked, forcing a smile. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he got up, slowly, and walked toward the counter. His face was pale, almost sickly, and his clothes were rumpled like he hadn't slept in days. He leaned on the counter, his breath reeking of something sour, like old food left out too long. "I have a quarter pounder," he muttered, his voice low, "and a side of your nightmares." I froze. What did he mean by that? I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was just some weird joke, but the way he looked at me made my skin crawl. I went to make his order, trying to ignore the feeling that something wasn't right. But as I turned my back to him, I could feel his eyes boring into me, like he was waiting for me to slip up. As I turned to prepare his quarter pounder, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual hum of the kitchen, frying, sizzling, and the sound of the grill felt muffled, distant, almost like the air itself was holding its breath. I glanced over my shoulder just for a second and saw him standing there in the same spot, staring. His face was expressionless, but I could feel his gaze on me like it was burning through my skin. I quickly focused on the grill, trying to steady my hands as I flipped the patties, but every time I reached for something, I could sense his presence. It was like he was there, right behind me, even though I knew he was still standing at the counter. "Here you go," I said, forcing a polite tone as I slid the burger toward him. He didn't move at first, just stared at the meal. I watched him, waiting for a reaction, but he didn't take a bite. Instead, he just ran his fingers across the top of the bun, his eyes never leaving me. "You ever feel like you're being watched?" he asked suddenly, his voice so quiet it almost seemed to blend with the background noise. "Like, no matter where you go, someone's always there, lurking?" I didn't answer, but my heart skipped a beat. His words hit too close to home. There was something wrong about this guy. It wasn't just his odd behavior, it was the way he spoke, like he was trying to pull me into some conversation I didn't want to have. "I'm just trying to do my job," I muttered, glancing nervously at Sandy, who was still cleaning in the back. I wanted to call her over, to have her help, but something told me this wasn't just another weird customer. The man finally took a bite of the burger, chewing slowly, his eyes never leaving me. The whole scene felt too calm, too controlled, like I was in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I tried to breathe, to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the sense of dread that was creeping up my spine. Then, without warning, he stood up, leaving the half-eaten burger on the counter. He moved toward the door, but just as he reached for the handle, he turned back and looked at me, his face still as blank as ever. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice cold and flat. "There's more to this place than you think." I felt a chill run down my back, like I was being dragged into something I didn't understand. He opened the door and left, the bell jingling above the entrance, but for a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the spot where he had been. My hands were shaking, and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself. "What was that about?" Sandy asked as she walked back over, noticing the look on my face. "Okay. I don't know," I replied, trying to shake off the unease. "But something's not right." I didn't realize it then, but that was only the beginning. The weirdest part was that after he left, everything seemed normal again. The restaurant buzzed with the usual late-night energy and the clock ticked on, but I couldn't stop thinking about what he said. "There's more to this place than you think." It was like he was warning me, like he knew something I didn't. The next night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I went into work with the usual sense of dread that had started to settle in my chest, but tonight, it felt heavier. The restaurant was busy, the usual late-night crowd came in, but my mind kept drifting back to that strange man from the night before. I couldn't stop thinking about his words, how he'd left in such a hurry, like he was fading into the shadow. I was working the counter again, trying to push my fear aside, when a familiar figure stepped through the door. My blood ran cold. It was him, the man from last night. This time he wasn't alone. Two others, both dressed in dark clothing, followed him in. They all looked around the restaurant for a moment, their eyes scanning the room like predators looking for prey. My stomach tightened. I tried to act normal, but my hands were trembling as I wiped the counter. The man saw me almost immediately. He smiled, this cold, knowing smile that made my skin crawl. "You're still here," he said, walking toward me. "I told you, you shouldn't be here." Before I could respond, one of the other men stepped forward. He was holding something in his hand, a small piece of paper. "You're part of something bigger now," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You've seen too much." I didn't understand what they meant, but something in my gut told me this wasn't just about some weird customer. They were here for a reason. "I don't know what you're talking about," I stammered, backing away from the counter. My heart was racing and panic was starting to set in. I had to get out of there, but just as I turned to head for the back door, one of them blocked my way. "You're not going anywhere," the man with the paper said, his voice growing darker. The man who had first spoken, the one who had warned me last night, stepped closer. "You've been seeing things, haven't you? Things that don't make sense. People who don't belong. People who vanish." I froze, the realization hitting me like a slap across the face. This was bigger than just a creepy encounter. Something was happening here, something wrong, something sinister, and I had been too blind to see it before. The second man handed me the paper, and for the first time, I saw what it was. A list of names. My name was at the top, followed by others. People who had worked at McDonald's in the past, but who had disappeared without a trace. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry, and I could feel my hands shaking as I read the names, each one a new horror. "Why me?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The man who had been watching me for the last 2 nights smiled again, but this time it wasn't a grin. It was something worse, something far more sinister. "Because you saw us," he said. "You saw what we do." I didn't get the chance to ask more. Before I could react, the lights in the restaurant flickered, and everything around me went dark. The last thing I remember is hearing their footsteps echoing in the silence as they walked away, leaving me in the dark. I don't know what happened after that. I woke up on the floor behind the counter hours later, the restaurant empty. The police never found anything. They said I must have fainted or had some kind of episode, but I knew better. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined the names on that paper or the way they had all disappeared. I quit the next day. No one believes me when I tell them the truth. They laugh it off, say it's just a story I've made up. But I know what I saw. And I know they're still out there, watching. Sometimes when I walk past a McDonald's, I see someone who looks familiar. Someone who reminds me of one of the faces from the list. I don't stop. I don't ask questions. I just keep walking. Because I know that I'm not the only one who's seen the darkness behind those golden arches. I've worked at McDonald's for a while, but nothing quite prepared me for what happened one late shift. It was around 2 a.m. and the restaurant was pretty much empty except for a couple of workers cleaning up in the back. The drive-thru was always quiet around that time, just the occasional car pulling up, maybe a late-night coffee run or someone grabbing a McFlurry on the way home. But that night, something was different. It started like any other order. A car pulled up to the speaker, and the soft chime of the drive-thru system clicked on. "Hi, welcome to McDonald's. What can I get for you?" I asked, ready to take the order. It was my usual cheerful tone, even though I was getting tired. The voice that came through the speaker was low, almost too soft, like they were whispering. "I'll have a large fries." With a side of regret, I froze. I didn't say anything for a second, trying to process what I had just heard. It wasn't a normal order, at least not one I'd ever heard. "I'm sorry, what was that?" I said, trying to shake off the chill running down my spine. The voice came through again, but this time it was clearer, and there was something off about it, like it was being distorted through static. "A large fries and a side of regret," it repeated, almost too calmly. I felt a weird unease creep over me. I tried to laugh it off, thinking maybe it was just a prank or some weird customer trying to mess with me. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Something about the way they spoke made my stomach tighten. I didn't want to let it show, but I could feel my heartbeat speeding up. I keyed in the order, trying to keep it professional. "Okay, your total is $2.99. Please pull around to the next window." I watched the car inch forward through the night, its headlights casting long, sharp shadows on the empty parking lot. When it stopped at the window, I could barely make out the shape of the driver in the dark, his face hidden behind the steering wheel. I handed the fries out, and that's when I noticed something strange. There was no sound coming from the car, no engine running, no music, just silence. I wasn't sure if I should say something or just move on. But before I could even speak, the driver reached out slowly and grabbed the fries, his hand shaking just slightly. He didn't say a word. Instead, he just stared at me, his eyes wide, unnaturally wide, like they were bulging out of his face. I felt a cold shiver run through me. It wasn't just that he was staring. There was something behind those eyes, a kind of emptiness. Before I could react, the car slowly rolled away, as quietly as it had come, leaving me standing there staring after it. I didn't know what was worse, the strange order or the way the guy looked at me. I tried to shake it off, but something about that interaction stayed with me all night, gnawing at the back of my mind. The rest of the night was a blur, the usual late-night rush with a few sleepy customers pulling up to the window, but I couldn't get the image of that driver out of my head. His eyes, that cold, empty stare. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just some weird guy trying to get a laugh or a strange customer who didn't know how to interact with people. But the thought gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake it. Around 4 a.m., just as I thought I was finally going to make it through the shift, the drive-through speaker crackled to life again. I looked up, expecting the usual, a late-night snack order, maybe a coffee or two. But when I heard the voice, my stomach dropped. It was him again. The same voice, the same low, almost whispering tone. "I'll have the same thing, the fries with regret." I froze, my pulse hammered in my ears as I stared at the speaker, not knowing how to respond. Was this some kind of sick joke? How was it possible? He'd been here only a few hours ago. There was no way it was the same person, right? I blinked, trying to focus, but the voice came through again. The fries and the regret, just like last time. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I had to calm down, had to stick to the script. Maybe he was just messing with me. Maybe he was a regular who thought it was funny. But it wasn't funny. It was terrifying. I keyed in the order again, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay, your total is $2.99. Please pull around to the next window." I could feel the cold sweat forming on the back of my neck as I waited for the car to roll up. When it did, it was just like last time. Silent, the headlights cutting through the darkness like a pair of ghostly eyes. It stopped at the window, and I immediately felt that same sinking feeling in my stomach. I didn't want to look at him, but I had to. I slid the fries through the window and he reached out slowly, his hand trembling just like before. But this time, as he grabbed the bag, he didn't let go. He held onto it for a moment longer than usual, his fingers brushing against mine in a way that felt wrong. His face was still hidden in the shadow of the steering wheel, but his eyes, I could see them clearly now, wide and hollow. There was no expression, just that empty stare, like he wasn't even there anymore. I took a shaky breath, trying to speak, to ask him what was going on, but before I could say anything, he leaned forward just enough to let me hear him. "I've been here before," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the restaurant. "And I'll keep coming back until you remember me." The words sent a chill straight through me. I didn't know what to say, how to respond. What was he talking about? Why did it feel like he wasn't just talking about the fries? Before I could react, he pulled away from the window, his car rolling off into the dark, leaving nothing but the sound of the tires on the pavement and the eerie silence that seemed to hang in the air. I stood there for a long moment, the bag of fries still in my hand, the strange encounter playing over and over in my mind. Who was he? Why did he keep coming back? And what did he mean by, "until you remember me"? Something told me this wasn't just a weird customer. There was something far darker at play here, something that I was too terrified to even begin to understand. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of fatigue and fear. I tried to push the incident with the silent driver out of my mind, focusing on the usual late-night orders. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The atmosphere in the restaurant had changed. It felt heavier, like I wasn't alone, even when there was no one there. At around 5 a.m., just as I was preparing to close the drive-through window for the night, the same car pulled up again. The headlights cut through the night, and I felt my stomach drop. I didn't need to look at the license plate to know who it was. It was him. I was paralyzed for a moment, staring at the approaching car. I couldn't go through with this again. I couldn't, but I had no choice. The speaker crackled, and his voice came through again, as if it had been waiting for me. "Large fries," he said, his voice colder than before, "and regret." I could barely breathe as I keyed in the order, my hands trembling. There was no way I could do this again, no way I could face him. I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't wake up. I opened the window, my heart racing as I prepared to hand him the fries. The car stopped at the window, but this time something was different. The silence was suffocating, the air thick with dread. As I slid the bag through the window, the man didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he leaned in, and this time I could see his face clearly. His eyes were wide, but they weren't just wide, they were hollow, empty, black voids where eyes should have been. I couldn't look away. I couldn't breathe. "You remember me now," he whispered, his voice low, almost a hiss. "I told you I'd keep coming back. You're not going to escape this. Not until you understand." I opened my mouth to say something, to scream, but nothing came out. I couldn't make a sound. His grip on the bag tightened, and I felt a sharp, icy cold shoot through my fingers as he finally took the fries. The car didn't move. It just sat there, like it was waiting for something. And then, as if some unseen force had taken hold of him, he spoke one last time, his voice now a whisper of a shadow. "I've been here before," he said. "I've always been here, and now you're part of it." Before I could react, before I could even think, the car pulled away, but this time something changed. The lights flickered in the restaurant. The air felt charged, like electricity had filled the space. It wasn't just a man at the window anymore. It felt like something was reaching out from the dark, something that had been here long before I ever showed up. I slammed the window shut, heart pounding, mind racing with a million questions. What did he mean? What was he talking about? Was it a prank? No, it wasn't a prank. I knew that now. Something far darker was involved. I went to the back to find my manager, but when I walked into the kitchen, everything stopped. The lights flickered again, and the air felt freezing cold. The kitchen, usually buzzing with late-night activity, was empty, completely empty. The register was open, the receipts scattered across the counter, but something else caught my eye. A piece of paper folded neatly in half. My name was written on it, the ink still fresh, as if it had just been placed there. I opened it, and my hands shook as I read the message. "You are part of something bigger. We'll see you again soon." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I crumpled the paper in my hand. The words burned into my mind. I tried to shake it off, but deep down, I knew something was horribly wrong. The man wasn't just some weird customer. He wasn't even human. The drive-through bell jingled one last time, but this time, it wasn't just a late-night order. It was a warning.